Before we get going, I just want to start on a religious note. On the Age website, just before I came here, I saw a story about something that happened today. Apparently, a plonker in a really expensive car was backing a jet ski into the water in Carrum, and he got the jet ski afloat, and then his car kept rolling and rolling back into the water and ended up totally submerged. And to me, that is absolute proof that God does exist. That's just a little religious interlude to start with. Now, as was explained, the reason I'm here, getting religious and existential again, is that in April last year, The Big Issue published this, which was a very long story for us. It ran for about 16 or so pages and did very well for us. And of course, it was written by Anna. And I was somewhat surprised when I heard down the track that this was not the end of it for Anna. In fact, I suspect that in some ways it was kind of a beginning. So why, having been on the cover of The Big Issue and having taken out practically half of the magazine, I can't imagine anything finer, why did you keep going?
In hindsight, I feel like, even though that is a good essay, I feel like it didn't even touch the surface of the issues.
But obviously, I mean, the whole thing started long before it came to my desk. In your mind, when did the whole journey into the woods begin?
It began when I was actually in Brisbane, and as you say in your article in the Readings newsletter, I was feeding eggs to a lizard.
As you do.
As you do. And I got a text message from a friend of mine, Ulla Majewski, who said to check my email, and there's some footage on it that she thought might be interesting enough for me to think about coming down to Tasmania. So the footage was a pretty vitriolic, aggressive piece of work showing about 3 loggers in fluoro high-vis gear smashing a car, and inside the car were 2 activists, fairly young adults, being yelled at to get out of the car. And I think the last thing you'd want to do is get out of the car into that scene, but their aim was to stay in the car because it was blocking a logging access road. And it was really quite a goose-pimpling watch. I didn't, and I was partly concerned, and I partly thought, well, this sounds like a good story.
Because it was a conflict situation?
Yeah.
Because this was happening in contemporary Australia? Why?
Well, what drives grown men, family men, to smash a car and pull at young adults, 2 young adults who obviously have nothing to defend themselves with, and try and drag them through shattered glass? I mean, I think that's kind of, it's a disgusting situation. And in a forest where, if it hadn't have been filmed by a hidden camera, to this day no one would even know about it or even believe that it happened.
But my memory is that in the book you describe how when you do get to Tasmania, you run into Ulla and she says something like, "Oh, Anna Krien, you're such a journo. Once the blood is flowing, you're here." At that stage, was it essentially a conflict story in your mind?
Well, I wasn't the only one there. A lot of journalists flooded to the story. So I kind of did what I do best, which is go into the background and not be there with my dictaphone and putting in people's faces and slamming up quotes and then doing a cut and paste copy of the story and leaving it. So I ended up wanting to go there for 3 days and staying for, a month and just living at the blockade and trying to understand a little bit more than that footage.
You said that there was a lot of media there. That's quite true. Did you regard yourself as one of those media people? What I'm getting at is, do you essentially regard yourself as a journalist?
Well, no, because I mean, I was watching some journalists walk with, like, they still had the price tags on their Blunderstones, you know, and there was other female reporters in their high heels, like going, "Oh, I can't deal with the mud." So no, I definitely wasn't one of the daily reporters. And even if I wanted to be, people just looked right through me. Like an inspector, I would say, "Oh, I'm a freelance," and they'll go, "You look like a rat bag." And I'll be like, "No, seriously, I'm not one of these kids." And I go, "Well, I don't know." So I can sort of pass as a few things.
Initially, you were essentially embedded with the blockaders, as in you were literally living with the blockaders, the people fighting for the forests.
Yeah.
At what stage did you realise, particularly if you were going to do a book, that you would have to also get to know the other side?
I knew all along that I'd have to get to know the other side. I just didn't realise that the other side was only a quarter of a way around the Monopoly board, in a way. So
As opposed to clear on the other side.
Yeah, well, I knew I would talk to loggers, but then I didn't realise I was going to have to talk to politicians from the last 20 years and go all the way back into company archives and all those kind of things. I mean, I think your general idea is you talk to a logger, you talk to a rat bag activist, and then you go home and you write the story. But it turned out to be, they were in a sense a false battleground. And they were interesting and they were colourful, but they weren't the real story.
So what was it?
The real story? Well, there's only 500,000 people on that island. And I kept forgetting that. That continually surprised me. I kept trying to add a zero onto it every time. And it was interesting who floated to the top there. There's some interesting decision makers, some Guns, the wood chipping industry down there, company down there, has friends in high places.
On that point, another news clipping, just to prove I don't just look at the silly ones about motor accidents. Headline from The Age, I think it was just last weekend. Timber giant concedes defeat in decades-old logging war. Guns is pulling out of native forest logging. So, is this all due to your book? Is this the end of the fight, or is this just a very small footnote, if you like, to what's going on?
I think there's two ways. You can look at it and say it's a transformative move. It's going to be great if they do what they said they're planning on doing. Mm-hmm. Nothing's been locked in, and at this very moment, really important forests have been logged. So it could be a great thing, and for Guns to survive as a business, it's essential because they need to tick a few boxes in order to get a pulp mill up and running. So native forest for them is bad.
Meaning that even though Guns may not be behind a chipping mill, someone else might step in, or not?
Yeah, well, I think the Forestry Tasmania, there's a lot of negotiations going on right now, and it's actually up to the state. It's up to governance. I mean, and I think this is basically the problem that underlies all of it, is that there's been some serious lapses of governance. Is it really up to Guns to make these calls, like that they're going to stop logging high conservation value forests? Is it really their decision to be made, or is it the state's decision?
How much of that gets back to Tasmania's smallness? The fact that it is a relatively small, enclosed community, and it seems from your book that decisions are getting made by just a handful of people, not all of whom are actually in government.
Yeah, there's a lot of mateship down there. But that's not to say it's not happening here. I think, and I was really wanted to avoid that everyone was like, oh, Tasmanians, you know, what are they doing down there? And we're doing the same thing on the mainland. It's just that we're a bit more sophisticated about it. We're a bit more sophisticated in our spin. We're not so, oh, bugger it, he's my mate, I'll cut the red tape. We have like channels that we go through to make it look all above board.
Speaking of those in control, you actually sat down and talked to Paul Lennon, the former Premier, and in some ways one of the great Satans in this story. How did you find that? And were you actually surprised that Paul Lennon would give you time to talk about this?
Yeah, I was definitely surprised. Which makes me think he feels hard, like he's been badly done by in the media, and he still wants his story to be told correctly. But to add to that, he didn't really help out much when it came to telling his story.
But you actually feel some sympathy for him, don't you?
Yeah, he was a toothless tiger. He was a man that built all his power on his intimidation and his large shadow that he casts, and he was shrinking, like literally physically shrinking. And that's sad to see. It doesn't really matter what you do. It's always sad to see someone who's put all their power into something that's physical, only to watch them face their own mortality. So
Paul Lennon, I guess, was one of the mates in Tasmania. Let's talk about the female factor. As in, you have a wonderful scene in the book where you basically bowl into a logger's pub and say, "Here I am, I'm here to talk to you." Was it a handicap, or was it possibly a help to be a woman walking into that situation?
I would like to pretend it was brave. It was just a brave situation, but I think it was very helpful that I was a woman. That pub in particular is well known for, it has one spotlight in the car park, and it's very well known for casting a ring of light, and that's where the men go to bash their brains out. So it's very well known for rumbles in the car park. So I think if I was a man, I would have found myself out there for sure.
On I guess a more serious point, one that intrigues me, why do you think it is that it is women who I think are writing some of the best non-fiction in Australia? And I'm thinking immediately of Chloe Hooper, I'm thinking of Helen Garner, Margaret Simon, some of what she's done. Why do you think, or is that just coincidental?
Well, you know that women are better.
But Amanda Lowry mentioned this to you too, didn't she?
Yeah, but she was saying, she thinks I'm brave.
Because you go for a rumble in the car park with the loggers, or what?
Yeah, and I don't think that's true. I think maybe people want to less intimidated by women, and women have less of the way that they go about interviewing is not quite so strategic, like they're playing political chess. I think they're probably a bit better at the art of conversation in the sense that they're not trying to prove that they're better than the interviewee. And maybe the fact that women are writing really good non-fiction says more about the readership and society than it says about them, in the sense that maybe they're being received differently by their interviewees. Maybe the story isn't taking them seriously, so they can actually get more of a foothold and better observations into it because they see that side of people.
Now, as much as you may not think of yourself as a journalist, you have actually done what good but not all journalists do, which is to try very hard to get both sides of the story. You talk to loggers, you talk to timber workers, you actually get to know a bit about their world. Were you surprised by what you found? Because one thing that comes through in the book is that this is not a black and white story. The loggers, like the blockaders, are people with families, people who have to live. That complicates things, doesn't it?
Yeah, I was not so much surprised about them having families and mortgages and children to feed and all that kind of stuff. I thought that was pretty obvious. It was more I was surprised that the loggers had been done over by two movements, and one was the environmental movement and the other was the wood chipping movement. And I think that was really interesting. they were being beaten down by both sides, and I found that really sad. And that's not necessarily something that is expressed not nearly enough. And I think it's partially their fault, because they're much more eager to blame the greenies and the environmentalists for what's going on.
Is that one reason you think why a lot of them were quite happy to talk to you? Did you get a sense that they felt that their attitudes, their beliefs hadn't actually been presented properly?
Yeah, I do think so. But also, I think people didn't mind chatting to me because I didn't understand things, and I was happy to admit that I wasn't all over the issues, and I was happy to admit stupidity and have them show me how to saw a log and have them draw pictures for me. And we would end up having much larger conversations about their situations, and I'll tell them a little bit about my situation, which is, the death of the newspaper. So my industry has to adapt, and it's not just them that are being forced to change, that a lot of people in a lot of different places.
This almost seemed to me to be worrying you a bit, that as a writer you work with paper.
Yeah.
You need paper for your work, and guess where it comes from?
Yeah, look at this. Imagine if this was a forest. Yeah. Yeah.
With something like this, and I guess this gets back to the whole point as to whether or not this is journalism, did you set out to be objective, or was that not part of what you wanted to do? Or is it in fact impossible to be objective in something like this?
I have an issue with how objectivity is defined in traditional journalism, which is it's used as a disguise to hide behind. To be objective is to say so-and-so believes this and so believes this. So now that I presented these views, I'm objective, so you can't attack me, which is just like saying, which someone has, I'm quoting someone, is, George Bush Jr. thinks the world is flat and Clinton thinks it's round, and I'm objective by saying that. Whereas there needs to be an underlying truth. Not everyone can be right, and that was what was so frustrating on the island, because everyone had science on their side, which is impossible.
What about, we'll get to your questions in just a minute, but when did you feel that you'd done enough research, you'd spent enough time in the forests, and now you could actually sit down and start writing this?
I don't know, I still feel like maybe there's more research to be done, but I was definitely in my pyjamas. I was definitely on the verge of a nervous breakdown. Definitely annoying my partner by saying, don't you think that looks like salinity? I think to save my sanity and everyone around me, it got to a point where, actually, no, I have a better answer.
Wipe that tape.
Sorry. No, it was actually when I went back to the island, probably for the third or fourth time, and all of a sudden I could have proper conversations with people.
As in you understood what they were saying?
Yeah. And that was when I was like, I'm getting it now. Because before that I was just a little bit of stupid. I was just sort of going, oh, okay, right, and not really understanding. But
when I went, also starting to hear the same things again and again?
Oh, but that started from the day one.
Yeah.
The spin started, and the same story started from the word go.
Tell me, the blockaders, the people you started off with, did they understand what you had to do when you were talking to the other side? I mean, there's a scene where you describe how you saw a carload of the blockaders going by, and your instinct is to hide.
Yeah, I was in a logger's car, to clear that up.
And you have a lovely line, as if I was having an affair, but I wasn't sure who with.
Yeah.
Did they understand why you had to, in some ways, cross over to the other side, or at least engage with the other side?
Yeah, I mean, I'm still yet to find out how they feel about me. I'm going to Tasmania tomorrow. But yeah, I mean, the core on-the-ground activists over in the forest blockade over there are fiercely intelligent, and they were giving me documents and papers that were being written, and then they were giving me another pile that completely counteracted all of those. So they were well aware that there were more sides to the story than theirs. But yeah, there were those moments when I was with a logger and then the rat bags would pull up beside me, and Tasmania's very small.
I may be paraphrasing, but you describe a clear fell or encountering a clear fell as being like an intake of breath. So when you actually saw what was happening in terms of the clearing, that obviously had an effect on you.
It's pretty confronting. I mean, there's these massive gaping holes in the landscape, and like I had to jiggle my car into these strange situations, and because it's hidden, it's all, and that's done very. There's nothing sneaky about it. Like they say quite openly that they do landscaping. It's forestry landscaping. So there's buffers along the road, and you can almost not see it if you don't want to. But I would find myself, and I only just learnt how to drive manual actually on my way over. So there were a few situations that weren't very pretty, and I was glad I was alone, although I needed help, but it was best that I dealt with it myself. So I'd have to like manually drive up these ridiculous inclines, and yeah, they were always surprising. Because they're just holes. They're like these huge craters. And there was one particular series of clear fells that I could never have gotten myself to see, and a former sawmiller took me to see them, and that was in the east, the northeast, which is often ignored in Tasmania because they're not majestic, mossy forests. But that was incredible. As far as you could see, there were clear fells.
So why was a sawmill guy taking you to see that?
Because he said he would never cut down another tree again, not because he doesn't like sawmilling or he doesn't think that sawmilling is a valid occupation, but because he thinks Tasmania's forest can't afford to lose any more trees, that they've been so ransacked for the last 40 odd years. So he closed his doors.
So this is an example of a sawmiller who is not the enemy.
No.
At all?
No.
Yeah.
I think wood chipping's the enemy. Yeah.
On that note, we do have to wrap it up. Anna will be staying around to sign books and pass on recipes and answer any very technical questions you may have about forestry or how to cut logs. I can absolutely commend this to you, Into the Woods by Anna Krien, who I am confident has never ever owned a jet ski.
Yeah.